The paper sheet on the gurney was thin and cold, crinkling with every nervous breath I took. The air smelled of rubbing alcohol and anxiety. This was it. The moment I was supposed to be a hero, the mother sacrificing a piece of herself for her son. But as I lay there, all I felt was a deep, chilling dread. My daughter-in-law, Ashley, swept into the pre-op bay. She wasn't wearing the rumpled, worried clothes of a family member. She was in a sleek, expensive yoga outfit that looked like it had never seen a bead of sweat. She glided over to me, her smile perfectly practiced, and patted my arm with manicured fingers. Her voice was a low whisper, meant only for me, like she was sharing a secret. "We're almost there, Ellie," she said, using that nickname she knew I hated. Her eyes weren't filled with gratitude, they were sharp, calculating. Then she delivered the words that froze the blood in my veins. "Just remember," she murmured, leaning closer, "the sooner this is over, the sooner the policy pays out. It's what's best for everyone." In that instant, everything became clear. This wasn't about saving my son's life, it was about closing a deal. I wasn't a mother making a sacrifice, I was an asset being liquidated. But that cold, hard moment in the pre-op bay wasn't the beginning of our story, it was the explosive end. To understand how my own body became the final signature on a multi-million-dollar insurance policy, you have to understand what I had built and what she was so determined to burn to the ground. The thing she wanted to burn wasn't a house, it was a landmark. It was 40 years of my life, built from grease, grit, and the audacious hope of a 28-year-old widow with 2 little boys to feed. She wanted to burn Ellie's corner. To anyone else, it was just a small diner off the old state highway, the kind of place you stop for coffee that's always on and pie that's always fresh. But to me, it was everything. I can still smell it if I close my eyes, the sharp, comforting scent of sizzling bacon on the flat-top grill, the sweet aroma of brewing coffee cutting through the morning air, and the faint, flowery ghost of yesterday's biscuits. I can feel the worn red vinyl of the booth where my boys used to do their homework, its cracks mapping out a decade of their childhoods. My husband, Frank, was a good man, but his heart gave out far too young. He left me with 2 sons, a mountain of worry, and a life insurance policy that most people would have used to just stay afloat. I took that check, every last dime of my savings, and I bought a failing little luncheonette. Everyone told I was crazy. A woman, on her own, in the restaurant business, it was 1,985. They might as well have told me I was building a rocket to the moon. I worked 18-hour days. My hands were perpetually chapped from dishwater and smelled faintly of onions. I was the cook, the waitress, and the janitor. My first real purchase, the first thing that made me feel like a genuine business owner, was an antique brass cash register. It was enormous, ornate, and cost more than I could afford, but I needed it. It wasn't just a machine for holding money, it was a symbol. It was solid. It was real. Every time a customer paid, the drawer would spring open with a loud, satisfying cha-ching. That sound, that bell, was the sound of my independence. It was the sound of me making it on my own. That sound defined my sons' lives. Daniel, my oldest, was always in a hurry. He'd work the register after school, his fingers flying over the keys, impatient. He saw the diner as a stepping stone, a place to escape from. He was handsome, charming, and wanted the life he saw on TV, the corner office, the fancy car, the effortless success. He loved me, but he was embarrassed by the smell of fried food that clung to my clothes. Leo, my younger boy, was different. He was quiet, methodical. He would watch me at the end of the night, counting the day's earnings. He understood the numbers. He saw the diner not as a cage, but as an engine. He saw the sweat and the sacrifice, and he respected it. He knew that every tile on that floor, every booth, every coffee pot was paid for with a piece of my life, and he was proud of it. The first time Daniel brought Ashley home from college, he brought her to the diner. I remember it so clearly. She walked in looking like a magazine ad, her clothes perfectly pressed, not a hair out of place. She smiled, but it never quite reached her eyes. I served them my famous cheeseburger deluxe, the one that had won a blue ribbon at the county fair. She carefully cut hers into 4 perfect squares and ate it with a knife and fork. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin after every single bite. "This is so quaint, Eleanor," she'd said, looking around. She didn't mean it as a compliment. I knew it in my bones. But Daniel was beaming, so in love. And what mother is going to stand in the way of her son's happiness? I sold the diner 5 years ago. My bones ached, and it was time. The sale put a comfortable cushion in my savings account and left a gaping hole in my soul. The new owners painted over the mural of the county landscape I'd hired a local artist to do. They replaced my beautiful brass register with a cold, silent touchscreen tablet. The bell was silenced. When Daniel got sick, it was fast and terrifying. One minute my strong, vibrant son was closing a big real estate deal. The next he was constantly exhausted. His skin had a grayish pallor, and the doctors were throwing around words like chronic kidney failure. I did what any mother would do. I stepped in. I cooked meals designed for renal health. I drove him to his endless appointments. I cleaned their house when Ashley was too overwhelmed to manage. Ashley played the part of the devoted wife perfectly. She managed the medications, she spoke with the doctors, she controlled all the information with ruthless efficiency. If I questioned anything, if I suggested a second opinion, I was met with a tight, brittle smile and a condescending, "I've got this, Eleanor. The doctors and I are on the same page." I was being sidelined in my own son's life, made to feel like a meddling old woman. And Daniel, so sick and scared, saw his wife as his champion, his only advocate. He saw my concern as criticism of her. The fear in our house was a living thing. It sat at the dinner table with us. It tucked us into bed at night. The medical bills started piling up into stacks that looked like skyscrapers. The whispers about how they would manage, what their future would look like, grew louder every day. I told them not to worry, that I had my savings from the diner, that I would help them, that we were a family. I remember Ashley looking at me across their granite kitchen island, her eyes unreadable. "It's more than that, Ellie," she said, her voice laced with a practiced sort of despair. "It's about long-term security. It's about Maya's future." That was when she told me we needed to have a family meeting to discuss the finances. She called it an all-hands-on-deck situation. I thought she was talking about my savings account. I had no idea she was really talking about my body. I came over that Saturday morning with my checkbook in my purse ready to be the hero. I walked into their house. My house, really, the one I'd sold to Daniel for a steal after I retired, and the smell of lemon-scented cleaner hit me like a wall. Ashley had scrubbed away every trace of the home I'd known. The warm scent of baking bread and old books was gone, replaced by the sterile, citrusy tang of a hospital waiting room. She had everything laid out on the massive quartz island in the center of the kitchen. It wasn't a messy pile of bills, it was a presentation. Stacks of envelopes were organized into neat, intimidating towers. On her laptop, a spreadsheet glowed, filled with columns of numbers in a sea of angry red. She had a highlighter in her hand and a deep, theatrical furrow in her brow. It was a perfect performance of a woman on the edge. "I'm so glad you're here, Ellie," she sighed, pushing a strand of professionally highlighted hair from her face. I don't know what we're going to do." I sat on one of the cold, metal bar stools she'd installed. I felt like I was at a corporate review, not a family meeting. I braced myself. "Ashley, whatever it is, we'll handle it. I have my savings. The diner was good to me. Just tell me the number." I was ready to write a check, to solve the problem, to do what I had always done, provide. She shook her head, a slow, mournful motion. "It's not a one-time fix. It's a tidal wave. Look." She turned the laptop towards me. The numbers were staggering, a constellation of co-pays, prescription costs, and hospital fees that made my head spin. Even with my salary, we're drowning. And if Daniel can't go back to work, what happens to Maya's college fund? To this house? My heart ached for my son, for my granddaughter. This was it, the rainy day I'd saved for my entire life. "I can help," I said firmly, reaching for my purse. "No," she said, placing a perfectly manicured hand over mine. Her touch was as cold as the countertop. "Your savings are a Band-Aid, Ellie. We need a cure." That's when she clicked to another tab on her spreadsheet. The screen was now filled with the dense, legalistic text of an insurance policy. She highlighted a single, massive number at the top, $5 million. "Daniel took this out when he started his firm," she explained, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "A critical illness policy. He was so smart, so responsible. It covers everything. It secures our entire future." I stared at the number, so large it seemed fake. All I could think of was my old brass cash register. I thought about the weight of the quarters and dimes I used to roll by hand at the end of a 16-hour day. I thought about the satisfying cha-ching of a $3 sale, the sound of one more bill paid, one more meal on the table. Every dollar that passed through my hands had a story, a history of sweat and effort. This $5 million, it felt like a ghost. It was money without a soul. So, what's the problem? I asked, my voice cautious. Ashley let out another perfectly calibrated sigh. The problem is that insurance companies are sharks. For a payout this big, they will tear our lives apart looking for a loophole. The policy is ironclad, but only if the condition is proven to be, and I'm quoting here, a non-preventable, congenital, or hereditary condition. An act of God, basically. She let the words hang in the air between us. The hum of the stainless steel refrigerator suddenly seemed deafening. She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the manicured lawn. I was doing some research, she said, her back still to me, just trying to understand the process, and I read this fascinating medical journal article. It said that for insurers, the gold standard for proving a genetic link in renal failure is a successful kidney transplant from a first-degree blood relative. I felt the air leave my lungs. The coffee mug in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. My knuckles were white. The heat from the ceramic was the only thing that felt real in a conversation that had taken a sharp, terrifying turn into the surreal. She wasn't looking at me, but I could feel her watching my reflection in the dark glass of the window. She was not asking me for my kidney. She was smarter than that. She was laying out a problem and presenting a single, elegant, multi-million-dollar solution. She was building a cage of logic and love and fear, and leaving the door wide open, knowing I would feel obligated to walk right in. She finally turned around, her face arranged into a mask of brave determination. "Of course it's a long shot," she said, her voice bright and brittle. "We have so many other hoops to jump through first. I just want to have all our ducks in a row." She closed her laptop with a soft, decisive click. The sound echoed in the silent kitchen. It was the sound of a trap being set. "Don't you worry, Ellie," she said, smiling that bright, empty smile. "We're a team. We'll figure this out. Together." I just sat there clutching my coffee mug, feeling the chill of that quartz countertop seep right into my bones. I had come here to offer my life savings. I was beginning to realize she was going to ask for a whole lot more. I left their house that day with a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The heavy weight of my checkbook was still in my purse, untouched. I had walked in ready to offer a lifeline, but Ashley wasn't looking for a lifeline. She was looking for a blank check, and she had made it terrifyingly clear that my own body was the ink she intended to use. The seed of dread she planted at that kitchen island took root and grew over the next few days. I tried to ignore it, busying myself with chores, telling myself I was overreacting. A mother's love is a fierce, blinding thing, and my oldest son was sick. It was easier to believe in a desperate wife than a calculating monster. It had to be. My younger son Leo came over that Wednesday. He had the same practical, steady hands as his father. He wasn't there for a big, emotional talk. He was there because I'd mentioned a dripping sound under my kitchen sink, and that was the kind of man Leo was. He showed up with a toolbox and a concerned look in his eye. As I made him a cup of tea, the familiar, comforting scent of Earl Grey filling my small kitchen, he spread a sheaf of papers on the table I'd eaten at for 50 years. It was a copy of Daniel's insurance policy. "I asked Ashley for it," he said, tapping a paragraph with a clean, blunt fingernail. "Told her I wanted to review the financials, see if I could find any tax advantages." She was happy to hand it over. Leo was an accountant, a man who lived in a world of clean lines and balanced ledgers. To him, the world was a puzzle where every piece had to fit, and this puzzle was keeping him up at night. "I've never seen underwriting like this, Mom," he said, his voice low and serious. "The premiums are astronomical, way more than Daniel's firm should have been paying. And this clause here," he pointed to a dense block of text. "It's the one she mentioned, about the illness having to be non-preventable, but the language is predatory. It basically gives them an out for anything that isn't a documented, multi-generational genetic condition. A sniffle could be environmental. A bad plate of shrimp could be externally induced. It's designed not to pay." I listened, but my mind was a whirlwind. As he spoke about millions of dollars in predatory clauses, all I could hear was the old, honest cha-ching of my brass register. That was real money. Earned money. It was the sound of a tired trucker's tip, a family's Sunday breakfast bill. It was solid. This thing Leo was describing felt like smoke, a dangerous illusion. Except for one thing, Leo continued, flipping the page. The payout is guaranteed, ironclad, if the patient receives a biologically compatible organ transplant from a direct blood relative. It's in here, Mom. It's a specific trigger for payment. It's not a hurdle to clear. It's the finish line. It overrides every other exclusion. He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine, begging me to see what he saw. Who structures a policy like this? It's like buying a lottery ticket where you only win if your own house burns down. It makes no sense. Unless you plan on setting the fire. A cold wave of nausea washed over me. The tea in my hand trembled, the cup rattling against the saucer. I put it down. The small clink was the only sound in the room. What he was suggesting was unthinkable. It was a monstrous accusation against the woman my son loved, the mother of my granddaughter. Leo, stop, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Just stop it. I'm not trying to upset you, he said, leaning forward, his voice earnest. I'm just saying something isn't right. Daniel was healthy 6 months ago. He runs marathons, and now he's on a transplant list? And his wife has a $5 million insurance policy that only pays out if he gets a kidney from you? Do you not see how insane that looks? I stood up and walked to the sink, the one he had just fixed, and stared out at my small garden. I couldn't look at him, because if I looked at him, I would see the logic in his eyes, and I wasn't ready for that. I was a mother. My job was to believe in the best, to hold on to hope, to protect my children. Right now, Daniel was the one who was sick. He was the one who needed protecting. Ashley was his shield, and Leo was throwing stones at her. She is his wife, I said, my back to him. She is terrified. She is looking for any port in a storm. Maybe she's not thinking clearly. Maybe she's just trying to find a way to save her family. Your brother loves her, and he needs her. He needs us to support her, not to be tearing her down with wild accusations. This isn't an accusation, Mom. It's math. His voice cracked with frustration. It's a balance sheet, and it's telling me we have a multi-million-dollar liability on our hands. I turned around, my heart hardening into a tight, painful knot. And what am I supposed to do, Leo? March over there and tell my dying son that his wife is a liar? Destroy what little piece he has left? For what? A theory? Because of some fine print in a document you don't like? The hurt in his eyes was a physical blow, but I couldn't back down. I was a mama bear, and right now, my sick cub was all I could see. I was choosing to be blind. Leo slowly gathered his papers, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He had come here to fix a leak, but he had found a much bigger one, a rot in the very foundation of our family, and I had just told him to cover it up and pretend it wasn't there. He paused at the door. I hope I'm wrong, Mom, he said quietly. I pray to God that I'm wrong. After he left, the silence in my house was deafening. The doubt he had planted was now a living thing, coiling in the pit of my stomach. I walked over to the mantel and picked up a framed photo of the boys when they were little, standing proudly in front of the diner, their faces smeared with chocolate. Daniel, grinning from ear to ear. Leo, standing beside him, ever watchful. I had always protected them. It was the central purpose of my life. But as I stood there, I was struck by a terrifying thought. What if the only way to protect one of my sons was to believe something monstrous about the other? I chose to believe the lie. It was easier. It was the only way I could get up in the morning, the only way I could look my sick son in the eye without my own heart shattering. I told myself Leo was wrong, that he was being cynical and suspicious. I told myself Ashley was just a frantic wife, grabbing at any solution, however extreme. I packed my doubts away in a dark corner of my mind and focused on my son. But Ashley, it seemed, was focused on something else entirely. She had started a campaign, a quiet, systematic war against my past. It began with the photographs. The house Daniel and Ashley lived in was the one I'd raised my boys in. The walls held memories. There was a photo of Frank and me on our wedding day on the mantelpiece. There was a picture of the boys covered in mud, holding up a tiny fish they'd caught at Miller's Pond. One by one, they started to disappear. In their place, Ashley hung abstract art canvases with a single, aggressive slash of black paint or sterile prints of geometric shapes. When I asked where the photos had gone, she gave me a bright, dismissive wave of her hand. Oh, I packed them away, Ellie. For safekeeping. We're just trying to modernize the space a little. A cleaner look, you know? I knew. It wasn't about a cleaner look. It was about creating a blank slate. Her slate. Next went my husband's armchair. It was a big, ugly recliner, upholstered in a faded plaid, with permanent indentations from the shape of Frank's body. It was the chair he'd sat in every night after closing the diner, the chair where he'd read stories to the boys. It was the last piece of him that truly remained in that house. I came over one afternoon to find a sleek leather monstrosity in its place, a chair that looked like it belonged in a therapist's office. It was stylish and cold and completely without comfort. The old one was so stained and dusty, Ashley explained, running a hand over the new leather. Probably terrible for Daniel's breathing. This is much more hygienic. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, looking at the empty space where my husband used to be, and felt another piece of my history get carted out to the curb. The final assault happened in the garage. My garage. It was the one place that was still mine, filled with the ghosts of Ellie's corner. The giant steel griddle, the row of red vinyl stools with their chrome legs, the old Hamilton Beach milkshake machine. And in the corner, covered by a dusty canvas sheet, was my brass cash register. The bell. It was the heart of it all. Ashley found me out there one Saturday, just running a hand over the dusty canvas. She had a clipboard in her hand and a look of brisk efficiency on her face. "You know, Ellie," she began, her tone light and casual, "I was talking to a friend who does estate sales. People pay a fortune for this vintage restaurant stuff. It's very trendy right now." I froze. "This isn't stuff, Ashley. This is..." I didn't know how to finish the sentence. My life's work? My soul? "It's clutter," she finished for me, her voice kind but firm. "It's taking up space, and honestly, the money could make a huge difference. It could cover Daniel's prescriptions for 6 months, maybe more." She weaponized my love for my son with surgical precision. How could I argue with that? How could I put a price on my memories when she had already put one on my son's health? "I'm not selling it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Ellie," she sighed, the sound dripping with disappointment, "I thought you wanted to help. This is for Daniel." Just then, the door from the kitchen opened, and Daniel shuffled in, looking frail and exhausted. He leaned against the doorframe for support. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice weak. Ashley's face transformed instantly into a mask of gentle concern. "Oh, honey, nothing. Your mom and I were just talking about maybe selling some of this old equipment to help with the bills. But she seems attached to it." The accusation was clear. I was being selfish. Daniel looked around the garage, his gaze landing on the canvas-covered shape in the corner. "Mom," he said, his voice pleading. "It's just stuff. We have to focus on what's important right now. Please, don't make this harder than it already is." That was the moment my heart truly broke. Not when Ashley had made her cold calculation in the pre-op bay, not when she'd laid her financial trap on the kitchen table, but now. My own son, the boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid for with 1,000 cups of coffee and plates of eggs, he was dismissing the very foundation of his life as just stuff. I felt the fight go out of me. What was the point of holding on to the symbols of my sacrifice if the person I had sacrificed for didn't even see them? I stepped away from the register. I didn't have to say a word. My surrender was in the slump of my shoulders, in the way I couldn't meet my son's eyes. Ashley seized the victory. "I'll call my friend," she said, already tapping on her phone. "She can come by on Tuesday to appraise everything." 2 days later, a woman with a clipboard and cold eyes walked through my garage. I watched from the kitchen window as she moved from piece to piece, scribbling numbers. Then she pulled the canvas off my beautiful brass register. I saw the sunlight glint off the polished metal, the metal I had polished myself every single night for 30 years. She ran her fingers over the keys, the ones that had been touched by my hands, my son's hands. Then she took out a small yellow sticker and pressed it onto the front of the drawer. On it, she wrote 2 words, Lot 47. They tagged my life's work, Lot 47, and with that little yellow sticker, I felt the last of my fight drain out of me. When your own son looks at the foundation of his life and calls it just stuff, you start to wonder what you were fighting for in the first place. I retreated into a quiet, gray fog. I cooked, I cleaned, I went to the hospital. I nodded and smiled in all the right places. I was a ghost in the machine of my own family, and Ashley was firmly in the driver's seat. The final push, the move that would corner me completely, came on a sunny Sunday afternoon in late September. Ashley decided to host a backyard barbecue. It was meant to be a celebration of family, a chance to rally around Daniel in his time of need. I knew it was a stage, and I knew I was the main event. The backyard was a perfect picture of suburban success. The lawn was an almost violently green carpet. The flower beds were a riot of professionally arranged color, and a brand new stainless steel grill the size of a small car gleamed in the Sunday quote. The air smelled of charcoal, fresh-cut grass, and the expensive perfume worn by Ashley's mother. Her parents, the Petersons, were exactly what you'd expect. Her father, Bob, was a man who looked like he was born on a golf course, with an easy smile, a firm handshake, and eyes that sized you up in a single glance. Her mother, Cynthia, was thin and elegant, dressed in crisp white linen. She complimented my blouse in a way that made it feel cheap and appraised my posture like she was judging a dog show. They were Ashley's reinforcements, the cavalry brought in to ensure my surrender. For the first hour, it was a masterclass in social theater. Bob grilled hot dogs, Cynthia arranged a fruit platter, and Ashley floated between guests, her face a perfect mask of worried but brave composure. Daniel was strategically placed in a comfortable lounge chair under a large patio umbrella, looking pale and noble in his sickness. I was assigned the role of the quiet, supportive matriarch, refreshing drinks and smiling wanly. The vice was already tightening. How can you scream when everyone is laughing? Ashley made her move after everyone had eaten. With a gentle hand on my elbow, she steered me away from the small crowd toward the far end of the patio. "Let's get you out of the sun, Ellie," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Her parents followed, as did Daniel, who walked over slowly, leaning on a cane I'd never seen before. It was a prop, another piece of the stage dressing. We sat in a small circle of cushioned patio chairs. It was an intervention disguised as a casual chat. Bob started, leaning forward with a look of deep sincerity. "Eleanor," he began, calling me by my full name, as if we were closing a business deal. "Cynthia and we just want to say how much we admire your strength. To build a business like you did, all on your own, it's the American dream. You're a fighter. It's in your blood." He was buttering me up, reminding me of my own strength before asking me to give a piece of it away. Then came Cynthia, the voice of cold, hard reason. "And because you're a smart, practical woman, you understand that sometimes sentimentality is a luxury we can't afford," she said, her eyes sharp. "A family is like a business, Eleanor. You have to make tough strategic decisions to protect your assets. Daniel, Maya, they are your most important assets. A mother's true legacy isn't in old memories or dusty objects. It's in the future of her children. The opportunity you have here, to secure that future, it's not a sacrifice. It's a privilege. My own legacy." I thought of the sound of the bell, the thousands of people I'd fed, the honest living I had carved out of nothing. They were trying to erase that. They were trying to tell me my entire life story was just the prologue to this one, final, bloody chapter. My hands gripped the metal arms of the patio chair, my knuckles white. I stared at a small ant crawling along a crack in the concrete, focusing on it, trying not to shatter. Ashley delivered the emotional blow. Her eyes welled up with perfectly timed tears. "I lie awake at night, Ellie," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I think about what will happen to him, to Maya. I can't do this without him." She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was cool. "You're the only one who can fix this. You're the only one who can give him his life back, to give us our future." Then, the final move. The checkmate. Daniel, who had been silent the whole time, leaned forward. He looked into my eyes, his own clouded with fear and exhaustion. He didn't need a long speech. His weakness was his power. "Mom," he said, his voice raspy and pleading. "Please, it's the only way. For me." I was surrounded. Every escape route was blocked by love, by guilt, by duty, by fear. To say no in that moment would have been an act of monstrous cruelty. To refuse would be to declare in front of everyone that I was willing to let my own son die. They had built the perfect cage. I couldn't speak. I could only give a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. A wave of relief washed over their faces. Ashley squeezed my hand. Cynthia gave a brisk, satisfied nod. Bob stood up, his booming voice shattering the tense silence. He raised his glass of iced tea. "Well then, it's settled," he announced to the rest of the party guests, who had been politely ignoring our little huddle. "Let's raise a glass, to family, and to Eleanor's incredible selfless gift." A ragged chorus of "To Eleanor" went up from the smiling, oblivious guests. They clinked their glasses and beamed at me. The unanimous vote was in. The jury of my family had reached a verdict. And I, the accused, the defendant, and the star witness, had never even been allowed to take the stand. I had been sentenced. In my own backyard, surrounded by the smell of grilled hot dogs and the sound of my family's laughter, a verdict was handed down. My body was no longer my own. It was a means to an end, a gift I was now obligated to give. The days that followed were a blur of cold efficiency. I was shuttled to and from the hospital for a battery of tests. They drew what felt like gallons of my blood. They had me talk to a psychologist who asked me if I was feeling coerced or pressured in any way, and I looked her in the eye and lied, the word no tasting like ash in my mouth. With every vial of blood, with every signed consent form, the cage door clanged shut, the lock turning with a final, echoing click. I had given up. The fight was over. Leo called a few times, his voice tight with worry, but I kept him at arm's length. "It's my decision, honey," I'd say, my voice flat and distant. I couldn't bear to hear "I told you so," but more than that, I couldn't bear the pain in his voice. I had chosen to abandon his truth, and now I had to live with it. I was scheduled for the preliminary workup in 2 weeks. It was real. It was happening. And then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the entire world tilted on its axis. My granddaughter Maya was at my house. Ashley was supposed to pick her up after a ballet class, but had texted saying she was stuck in a critical meeting and would be late. This had become common. I didn't mind. The hours with Maya were the only flashes of light in my gray, suffocating world. She was 10 years old, a bright spark of a girl with my son's eyes and a fierce, curious mind. She was working on a school project, a report on ancient Egypt, and was getting frustrated with the old encyclopedia I had on the shelf. "Gigi," she said, using her name for me, "can I borrow Mom's iPad? It's way faster for research." Ashley had left her iPad on the charger in my kitchen. "Of course, sweetie. Just be careful with it." Maya happily plopped down at the kitchen table, the same table where Leo had tried to warn me, and powered on the screen. I was in the living room, folding laundry, the rhythmic snap of the sheets, a small, comforting metronome in the quiet house. I could hear her humming to herself as she worked. About 20 minutes later, her humming stopped. The silence that replaced it was sudden and heavy. "Gigi." Her voice was small, uncertain. "What's ethylene-glycol?" I walked into the kitchen, a dish towel still in my hand. "I don't know, honey. Some kind of chemical, I guess." "Why?" She was staring at the iPad screen, her brow furrowed in confusion. She turned it towards me. I typed in how to build a pyramid for my project, and this other stuff popped up. From Mom's old searches. I took the iPad from her. My brain was slow to process what my eyes were seeing. It was the browser's search history, a list of Ashley's most recent inquiries. And they weren't about ballet schedules or business meetings. My eyes scanned the list, each line a separate, icy stab of horror. Odorless poisons that mimic renal failure. Long-term effects of ethylene glycol exposure. How to clear cloud-synced search history from all devices. Is antifreeze detectable in routine blood work? Life insurance payout rules. Homicide versus illness. I felt the floor drop out from under me. The dish towel slipped from my hand and fell to the floor. My breath hitched in my throat. Every single lie, every doubt I had suppressed, every warning I had ignored, came rushing back in a single, devastating tidal wave. Leo's words about the policy being designed not to pay. The predatory clause. Daniel's lightning-fast decline from a healthy marathon runner to a man on a transplant list. Ashley's coldness, her focus on the money, her systematic erasure of my past. It wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was a plan. A cold, meticulous, and monstrous plan. I thought of my brass cash register, the sound of the bell, the symbol of a life spent building, creating, providing. And I looked at the words on the screen, words of destruction, of poison, of deceit. This was the battle I had been in the middle of all along, a battle between creation and destruction. And I had been willingly walking toward my own obliteration. Maya was looking up at me, her eyes wide with fear. Gigi, what's wrong? You're shaking. Is Mom in trouble? Her innocent question snapped me out of my horrified paralysis. A new feeling surged through me, so hot and powerful it burned away the fog of despair. It was rage. A pure, righteous fury I hadn't felt in 30 years. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about my son. This was about my granddaughter, this innocent child living under the same roof as a monster. I knelt down and looked her in the eye, keeping my voice as calm as I could. Your mom isn't in trouble, sweetie. She was just helping a friend with some research for a mystery novel. It's silly grown-up stuff. The lie felt slick and wrong in my mouth, but I would do anything to protect her from this ugliness. Hey, why don't we take a break and make some of my famous chocolate chip cookies? As soon as she was happily measuring flour, her back to me, I took the iPad into my bedroom and took a picture of the screen with my old flip phone. Then, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers, I made a call. He picked up on the second ring. Mom, is everything okay? I took a deep, steadying breath. My voice, when it came out, was not the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a woman who had just been handed a weapon. Leo, I said, my voice low and urgent. You need to come over, right now. Don't tell anyone where you're going. What is it? What's wrong? It's about Daniel, I said, looking at the horrifying picture on my phone screen. And you were right. You were right about everything. When Leo burst through my door 20 minutes later, his face was pale with dread. I didn't need to explain. I just handed him the iPad. I watched as he read the list of searches, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the device. The color drained from his face, replaced by a dark, rising flush of fury. He looked up at me, his eyes blazing with a pain so deep it stole my breath. It was the agony of a man who had been screaming a warning into the wind, only to finally be heard when the hurricane was already on top of us. We go to the police, he said, his voice a low growl. Right now, I'm calling them. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. No. The word came out of my mouth with a calm, cold authority that surprised even me. The fog of my grief had burned away, leaving behind the hard, clear certainty of a woman with nothing left to lose. He stared at me, bewildered. No? Mom, she is poisoning him. She's a murderer. And if we go to the police now, what happens? I asked, my voice level. She denies it. She says she was researching a character for a book club novel. She says her iPad was hacked. It becomes a messy, drawn-out battle of his word against hers. She'll paint me as a hysterical mother-in-law and you as a jealous brother. And while that's all happening, Daniel gets sicker, and she covers her tracks. So we do nothing? He asked, incredulous. We just let her win? No, I said, walking over to my kitchen table and sitting down. I felt a strange sense of clarity, the kind you get in the dead of night when you're poring over receipts and invoices, trying to make the numbers work. Running a business for 40 years teaches you that sometimes the direct route is a dead end. Sometimes you have to let your opponent overplay their hand. We don't let her win. We let her think she's already won. Leo looked at me, the fury in his eyes slowly being replaced by confusion. What are you talking about? You were the one who saw it, Leo, I said, looking him straight in the eye. The insurance policy. The transplant isn't a hurdle. You said it yourself, it's the finish line. It's the final, undeniable proof she needs to cash that check. If we stop her now, the crime is incomplete. She has plausible deniability. But if we let her get to the finish line... The horrific understanding of what I was proposing dawned on his face. Mom, no. You can't. You can't go through with the surgery. It's too dangerous. It's the only way to be sure she pays for what she's done, I said. My voice was steady. We have to let her walk right into the trap. We let her believe she has me, that she has the kidney, that she has the money. We let her get so close to that $5 million she can taste it. And in that moment, when she is at her most triumphant, her most arrogant, we take it all away. This was my queen's gambit, a chess move where you sacrifice a valuable piece to gain a decisive advantage. I was the piece. For a long moment, Leo was silent. He paced the small kitchen, running a hand through his hair. He was an accountant. He understood risk assessment. He was weighing the danger to me against the certainty of justice for his brother. What do you need me to do? He finally asked, his voice rough with emotion. The plan came to me then, fully formed. You are my lawyer now, I said. You will contact the fraud division of that insurance company. You will tell them you have evidence of a plot to commit murder and insurance fraud. You will tell them we have a plan to catch her in the act, but it has to be on our terms. Then, you will contact the hospital administration. You'll need a lawyer with you. You will show them the evidence and explain the situation. This all has to happen in the hour before the surgery, not a minute sooner. The next week was the hardest of my life. I had to become the greatest actress in the world. I had to play the part of the defeated, self-sacrificing mother, while inside I was a general planning a war. When Ashley called to confirm an appointment, her voice sickly sweet, I made my own voice sound tired and resigned. Yes, Ashley, I'll be there. I went to the final pre-operative consultation. I sat on the crinkly paper of the examination table and nodded meekly as the surgeon explained the risks. He talked about recovery times, potential complications, the scar I would carry for the rest of my life. All I could think was, my legacy is not going to be a scar. My legacy was the sound of a bell, the satisfaction of a hard day's work, and the fierce, unending love I had for my sons. A love that was now demanding I walk through fire to save them both. The night before the surgery, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my quiet living room looking at the photos Ashley hadn't gotten around to taking down yet. I felt a strange, unnerving calm. For months, I had been a pawn in her game, moved around the board against my will. But tonight, I was the one in control. The board was set, the pieces were in motion, and tomorrow morning, I would make my final move. The final move of a chess game is often the quietest. I walked into the hospital that morning with the steady calm of a woman walking to her fate. But it wasn't my fate I was walking toward, it was hers. Every beep of the hospital machines, every rustle of a nurse's scrubs was a tick of the clock, counting down to the moment the trap would be sprung. They prepped me in a small, cold bay in the surgical wing. A young nurse with kind eyes inserted an IV into the back of my hand. She thought she was preparing me for surgery. I knew she was just setting the stage. Through a large pane of glass, I could see the family viewing gallery, a comfortable, soundproofed room where Ashley and her parents were waiting. My son Daniel was in an adjacent bay, already sedated, oblivious. Ashley stood by the glass, a portrait of performative grief. She had her hand pressed to the window, her brow furrowed. But her other hand held her phone, and I could see the faint glow of the screen as she periodically checked it. She wasn't watching me with concern. She was watching me like a stockbroker watches the ticker tape just before the closing bell, waiting for her investment to mature. Her parents stood behind her, their arms crossed, looking not at me, but at the door, as if expecting a delivery. They were all waiting for the payout. I let my own face crumple into what I hoped looked like fear and resignation. I looked over at my son, my beautiful sleeping boy, and let a real tear slide down my cheek. The tear was for him, for the son I had almost lost, for the trust he had so tragically misplaced. Then, I looked back at Ashley, and my gaze was meek, defeated. It was the performance of a lifetime. Inside, my mind was a block of ice. I was thinking of the diner, of the final moments of a busy night. All the customers have gone home, the grill is cooling, and it's time to cash out. You count the bills, you roll the coins, and then you pull the lever on the register. Cha-ching. The bell rings, the drawer flies open. It's the sound of the day's work being done, of accounts being settled. I looked at Ashley, so smug and triumphant behind that glass, and all I could think was, the bill is coming due. A surgeon came to my bedside. "We're ready for you, Eleanor. Just a few more minutes." I gave him a weak nod. This was it, the moment of truth. My heart wasn't pounding with fear. It was steady. It was ready. Then, I saw it. The door to the viewing gallery opened. Ashley looked up, her face a mask of annoyance at the interruption. It was Leo. He wasn't alone. With him was a tall, severe-looking woman in a dark suit, holding a tablet. Two uniformed hospital security guards stood behind them, their presence immediately sucking all the air out of the room. The woman in the suit stepped forward, her heels making no sound on the carpeted floor. Ashley's look of annoyance curdled into confusion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice tight. "Mrs. Miller," the woman said. Her voice was calm, professional, and carried the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "I'm Sarah Jenkins, the hospital administrator. We need to have a word." Ashley's eyes darted from the administrator to Leo, then back again. Panic began to flicker behind her carefully constructed facade. "I'm sorry, we're in the middle of a family medical emergency. Can't this wait?" "No," the administrator said, her voice flat. "It cannot." She held up the tablet, the screen glowing. On it was the crystal-clear image I had taken of her iPad's search history. "We have some questions for the hospital's legal records. Specifically, about your research into ethylene glycol." The name of the chemical hung in the silent room like a poison gas. I saw the blood drain from Ashley's face. The mask of the grieving wife didn't just crack. It shattered, revealing the cornered, rabid animal beneath. "What is that? I've never seen that before," she stammered, her voice rising an octave. "My iPad was... Leo is doing this. He's always been jealous of me, of my marriage to Daniel." Leo didn't even flinch. He just looked at her with a cold, quiet pity. The administrator ignored the outburst. "Our security team is here to escort you to my office, where a representative from your husband's insurance provider and 2 detectives from the city police department are waiting to continue this conversation." Checkmate. At that moment, Ashley's terrified eyes locked with mine through the glass, and in that one silent exchange, everything was laid bare. She saw the meek, defeated old woman she had been manipulating for months disappear, replaced by the woman who had just dismantled her entire world. The hatred in her eyes was so pure, so venomous, it was almost stunning. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held her gaze. I let her see the truth, that I had seen her, I had known her, and I had beaten her at her own vicious game. As if on cue, the surgeon who had spoken to me moments before re-entered my bay. He moved with a quiet purpose, not looking at the chaos unfolding in the gallery. He reached over and, with a simple flick of his thumb, stopped the saline drip on my IV. Then he began to methodically unhook the heart monitor electrodes from my chest. Each click of a wire being disconnected was like the sound of a lock being opened, a chain falling away. The last thing I saw was the security guard stepping forward, each taking one of Ashley's arms. Her perfect, composed world had come to a sudden, sterile and silent end. The bell had rung, and her account was settled in full. There was no applause. There was no triumphant swell of music. After Ashley and her parents were escorted out of the viewing gallery, there was only a profound, humming silence. The chaos had been so quiet, so clinical, that its absence was almost deafening. I lay on the gurney, the IV line removed from my hand, a small piece of cotton taped in its place. The adrenaline that had held me together like a steel frame for the past week simply evaporated, leaving me feeling as fragile as a hollow eggshell. A nurse, the one with the kind eyes, came over and gently placed a warm blanket over me. "Can I get you some tea, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice soft. I just nodded, unable to speak. The simple human kindness of her offer felt like a life raft. Leo appeared at my side a moment later. His face was etched with a mixture of relief and sorrow. He didn't say, "We did it." He didn't say, "I told you so." He just reached out and took my hand, his practical, calloused fingers wrapping around mine. He squeezed. Once, it was enough. It said everything. We had won. But my God, look at the battlefield. Our family was in ruins. A doctor with a grim expression came into the bay. He pulled up a stool. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice low, "I am so profoundly sorry. We've already been in contact with Daniel's nephrologist. We're ceasing his current immunosuppressant therapy immediately and starting a new treatment protocol. We have to assume he's been exposed to a nephrotoxin." Hearing the word toxin from a doctor, spoken in the sterile, factual language of medicine, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. It wasn't just a search history on an iPad anymore. It was a poison, flowing through my son's veins, put there by the woman he loved. I closed my eyes, the weight of it all threatening to crush me. The days that followed were a strange, surreal montage of consequences, mostly relayed to me by Leo as I sat by Daniel's hospital bed. The life Ashley and her parents had so carefully constructed wasn't just cracking, it was being demolished. Leo told me about the interrogation. Ashley, stripped of her audience and her power, had apparently crumbled. Her performance as the grieving wife dissolved under the flat, unimpressed questioning of the detectives. Her story changed 3 times in an hour. First, she knew nothing. Then, she claimed she was researching for a friend. Finally, she tried to pin the blame on some unknown online advisor who had sold her herbal supplements for Daniel that must have been contaminated. Her lies were frantic, flimsy things, like moths beating against a light bulb. The financial fallout was even faster and more brutal. Leo, in his element as an accountant, explained it to me in quiet, grim tones. "It's the clawback clause, Mom," he said, showing me a document from the insurance company's fraud unit. "They're not just denying the $5 million claim. They're investigating every medical claim Ashley has filed for the past 2 years. They believe the entire illness was manufactured, a long con from the very beginning." The first tangible sign was the tow truck. A nurse mentioned seeing Ashley's gleaming white luxury SUV being hauled out of the hospital's VIP parking lot. It had been seized as an asset in the fraud investigation. Then came the news that their bank accounts were frozen. The beautiful house, my old house, had a lien placed on it. The money that had driven Ashley to do the unthinkable wasn't real. It was a house of cards, and a single gust of truth had blown it all away. Even her parents weren't immune. Their names appeared in a small article in the local paper, mentioned in connection with a suburban fraud and illegal pharmaceutical investigation. For people like the Petersons, who lived and died by their social standing and their reputation at the country club, that public shame was a fate worse than prison. I thought about my old cash register, the Bell. Every sale, every transaction was a straightforward, honest exchange. A customer gave me money, and I gave them a hot meal. The books always had to balance at the end of the day. Ashley's entire life was an unbalanced ledger, a series of uncashed checks written on an account of lies, and the auditors had finally arrived. She had spent years trying to erase my legacy, to sell off the symbols of my hard work for scrap. But in the end, her own legacy, the one built on smoke and mirrors, was the one that vanished overnight. I sat in the quiet of Daniel's hospital room, listening to the steady, rhythmic beep of the new machines that were actually healing him. I felt a profound sadness, but not for Ashley. I felt it for my son. I felt it for my granddaughter. And in a strange way, I felt it for the woman I had become in those last few weeks, a cold, calculating strategist who had used her own body as bait in a trap. I had done what I had to do. I had protected my family. But the victory felt heavy, coated in the ash of what we had lost. I had won the war, but I wasn't sure I would ever feel clean again. Victory doesn't feel the way it does in the movies. There's no soaring music, no slow-motion celebration. There is only the quiet, hollow echo after the battle is over. I had won the war for my son's life, but the victory felt heavy, coated in the ash of what our family had become. I wasn't sure I would ever feel clean again, and I was terrified that the trust between us had been permanently poisoned, just like Daniel's body. The days that followed were a slow, quiet rhythm of recovery. The hospital room became my new home. I learned the different beeps of the machines, the shift changes of the nurses, the precise moment the morning sun would hit the window. Daniel was started on a grueling regimen of dialysis and something the doctors called chelation therapy, a slow, arduous process of cleansing the toxins from his blood. The word poison was now a part of our official vocabulary, a clinical, terrifying fact. For the first week, Daniel barely spoke. He was a ghost, haunted by the betrayal that was more toxic than any chemical. He would stare at the ceiling for hours, his face a blank mask of shame. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. Every time I brought him his food or adjusted his pillows, I could feel the wall of his guilt between us, thicker than any pane of glass. He was drowning in it, and I didn't know how to pull him out. Leo was my rock. He came every single day, bringing me clean clothes and coffee, handling the endless stream of paperwork and calls from lawyers and investigators. He was the practical engine of our survival, just as he'd always been. But I saw the toll it was taking on him, the dark circles under his eyes, the permanent line of tension in his jaw. The breakthrough came late one night, about 2 weeks in. I had dozed off in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, my neck stiff and my head filled with buzzing, anxious dreams. A small, raspy sound from the bed woke me up. It was Daniel, trying to speak my name. "Mom?" I was by his side in an instant. "I'm here, honey. What is it? Do you need some water?" He shook his head, and for the first time in weeks, he met my eyes. They were red-rimmed and filled with a pain that was almost unbearable to witness. "I was so stupid," he whispered, his voice cracking, "so blind." This was it. The conversation I had been dreading and praying for in equal measure. I just took his hand. It felt thin and frail in mine. "You were sick, Daniel. You were manipulated." No, he said, a tear finally breaking free and tracing a path down his gaunt cheek. It was more than that. I wanted to believe it. I wanted the easy life she promised. The big house, the fancy car, the success that didn't smell like a deep fryer at the end of the day. His words were a confession, an admission of a sin I hadn't even known he'd been carrying. I spent my whole childhood watching you and Dad kill yourselves for every single dollar, he went on, his voice thick with shame. I heard that cash register bell, that cha-ching, and I didn't hear independence. I heard a struggle. I didn't want to struggle, Mom. Ashley, she was my shortcut. She was the American dream, without the work. I squeezed his hand, my own tears starting to fall. He was finally telling the truth. Not just about Ashley, but about himself. I let her push you away, he said, his voice breaking. I let her sell off pieces of our life like they were just junk in a garage. I called your life's work just stuff. God, Mom, I am so sorry. He was sobbing now, the deep, ragged sobs of a man whose world had been built on a lie. I didn't say, I forgive you. The words felt too small for the moment. Instead, I did the only thing a mother can do. I leaned over, wrapped my arms around his shaking shoulders, and held him. I held my son, the man who was lost and now was being found, and I let my tears fall into his hair. The next day, Leo came to visit. I left them alone. I stood in the hallway outside the room for a long time, my heart pounding. When I finally peeked back in, I saw Leo sitting on the edge of the bed. Daniel was talking, and for the first time, Leo was really listening. Then I saw Daniel extend a trembling hand to his brother. Leo didn't hesitate. He grasped it, and then he pulled his older brother into a fierce, awkward hug. The long, cold war between them was finally over. It wasn't a magic wand. The road back would be long. There were months of treatment ahead for Daniel, years of emotional scar tissue for all of us to navigate. Maya was now living with me, and the questions she was starting to ask about her mother were getting harder to answer. Our family had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. But as I watched my two sons in that hospital room, their hands clasped in a silent promise to rebuild, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was hope. A fragile, tender, and fiercely precious hope. We had a long road back, but for the first time, it felt like we were all finally walking on it together.